Have you ever wondered how a mind with schizophrenia views the world? How terrifying are their visions? Well, today I will take you on a super interesting journey through drawings made by people with this condition. People who tried to describe the best they could those beings who visit them and who for them are extremely real as you or me. I'm Leonor Clay, and this is The Darkest Secret. Today we present the most disturbing drawings made by people with schizophrenia. This video will be very different from all the others, and the main reason is the drawing that you now see on the screen. The drawing inspired the creation of this entire investigation. This drawing was handmade by a patient with schizophrenia, but it's not just any patient. It's one of the patients of one of our subscribers. A subscriber currently practicing art therapy in a psychiatric hospital. He is a psychiatrist by profession, but also specializes in art therapy and uses drawing techniques in his practice to help patients explore and express their visions and feelings. From now on, we will call this subscriber the doctor. Well, here comes the interesting thing. The doctor, asking me for complete discretion and information, sent me some photos of his patient's drawings. But don't get confused. He did not send them to me just because terrifying shapes appear in them, but because he has been working at this hospital for more than 15 years and has noticed a pattern in the drawings his patients make. Although 90% of the time the drawings are different, sometimes different patients manage to describe the same entity that comes to harm them, although the reason for this can be varied. He believes that the pattern in these drawings may not be entirely due to visions. He theorizes that perhaps within the gloomy corridors of the hospital, there lives something that is taking over the minds of his patients. You will learn the stories of the doctor's patients a little later. Let me start with a setting that will allow you to better understand the relationship between drawings and a disturbed mind. Do you remember the case of Elisa Iam? The girl who disappeared one day at the Cecil Hotel, only to be found later in a water tank. In the end, her death had been accidental, but caused by the visions produced by her bipolarity. When Elisa wasn't taking her pills, she saw creatures, monsters so terrifying they made her behave erratically, trying to escape and hide from them. She was having those visions when she showed herself to us in the elevator and stuck her head out as if she were hiding from something. The mind is so powerful, and no matter how much you know that they are just visions, they look so real that if you have them for a long period of time, they could cause you to confuse what is real from what your mind projects to you. There are many videos on the internet that try to describe what it's like when someone has a psychotic attack. The drawings are something else. That's when you can really understand what the mind of a disturbed person is like. What you are seeing on the screen is a painting by Richard Dadd, a famous painter who became popular for works like these. Paintings where what draws the most attention is the detail of everything shown in the image. However, Richard had a uniqueness. He suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. They learned about this after an event that occurred on an expedition to Egypt. His personality changed. He was erratic, spoke incoherently, and became extremely violent. He fervently believed that he was under the influence of the Egyptian god Osiris. When they learned about this condition, his family took him to their country house to recover. It was here, in this house, where his visions became so intense, so real, that he ended up convinced that his father was the devil. So one night, and while his father's back was turned, Richard took a knife and stabbed his father, killing him right then and there. He escaped to France, and in his psychosis tried to take the life of another passenger, whom he saw as a demon instead. This is how he spent the rest of his life locked up in a mental hospital. But Richard never stopped painting. However, his paintings were no longer like before. In almost all of them, he painted murders, or slightly more subtle detail, but no less important. This is one of his most famous paintings. A painting where perspective does not exist, and where detail dominates. However, here Richard hit something else. First, he highlights something that is replicated in almost all of his artwork: the existence of gnomes and fairies. He used to paint things like that. Things that he later confessed in the asylum. He drew them exactly as he saw them in his visions. But there is also something else here. Notice how behind each person there seems to be someone else, as if stalking them. Scholars believe that he was trying to represent the crime that he had committed years ago. Note the color of the creature's skin. It is said that Richard stared at his father's body until it adopted that same color. Another good example that helps us understand how the mind destroys reality. When the memory of the painter William Ottermalin began to fail and deteriorate as a result of Alzheimer's, he decided to paint mostly self-portraits of what he remembered was his face. He used to draw himself from memory. This is one of the self-portraits from 28 years after he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. However, as the years passed, the detail was lost. The proportion, too. And the expressions became increasingly disturbing. I remind you that what you see now is how he saw his face in his mind, the way he remembered himself. Thus, until reaching the final state, not only did he not remember his face, but he did not remember anyone else's. This is what he saw in his mind when he tried to remember who he was. The case of Brian Sharnley is also very interesting to look at. He was also admitted to a psychiatric hospital and unintentionally used art therapy to escape his situation a little and feel better. The curious thing about his paintings is that they came with entries to a diary, something very similar to what you will learn about in the case that our subscriber will present to us in the next few minutes. Brian drew this self-portrait for the following reason. According to what he said in his diary, he describes, note this other drawing, a face with eyes, mouth, and nose crossed out with a cross, done in a completely different and primitive style. This drawing carried with it the following description. He made several other paintings about his progression towards madness, how living with his schizophrenia became increasingly difficult. And this one. It is Brian Charley's last painting, before he sadly took his own life. He did not leave a note for this one. Some believe that he did not finish it, due to his simplistic style. He usually did not draw like that, much less abstract ones. However, the date on the lower side shows that the work was finished. Brian, without knowing it, used art therapy as a remedy, as medicine for his situation, something that is currently a fairly common practice, just as Kate Fenner did. A girl knowing how to draw very well, wanted to portray all her hallucinations because they help her cope. And I think you would too if your visions were like this. This is one of the entities that sometimes appear to Kate. She calls him the Messiah. He has an inverted cross on his forehead. And the most terrifying thing is that he has no eyes. The Messiah usually appears from the dark, but also appears during the day, usually materializing from the face of another person. In this other drawing where you can see a kind of manta ray, she drew it to represent the type of noises she heard from the walls, as if she were under the ocean and strange things were crawling around there. This other image represents the sensation of feeling observed, that everything and everyone is always watching you. Those red things represent mouths or tongues that also speak to her. This strange image is an attempt, as faithful as possible, to describe what usually descends through the ceiling at night. This image is a memory of a vision that has only happened once. According to her, she went to the bathroom, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw that face. And so on, with one more set of drawings that you can see yourself from her Instagram page. Drawings that she herself said have helped her understand her visions and overcome them so that she no longer fears them. And in the field of psychology, art therapy has become an extremely useful mechanism to cope with things that have to do with the mind. According to what the doctor, our subscriber, says to me, art therapy facilitates communication with the patient. He details to me that some of his patients with schizophrenia may have difficulty communicating verbally, and art provides them with an alternative means of expressing their thoughts, feelings, and experiences. It also clarifies for me that visions can be difficult to describe in words. Capturing them in a drawing helps to understand if there is any reason rooted in the subconscious and thus be able to treat it. The doctor has been in the field for 15 years and always dedicates a small space in his sessions to art therapy. This is how he tells us that he has managed to keep several interesting drawings that his patients have given him after hours and hours of treatment. He confesses to me that he does not always apply art therapy, but that even so, the stories that his patients tell him about their visions are quite terrifying, and it is the main reason why he understands perfectly why people lose their sanity. For example, he tells us a story of a 27-year-old patient who claimed that several times and almost always while the sun is setting, he sees people hanging from trees. He assures that it is one of the most coherent visions he has, and the one that is repeated the most. For now, it is already part of his environment. He had another patient who was just discovering her schizophrenia, a 30-year-old woman who seemed dazed and disturbed by the new condition she had to deal with. Her life had been completely normal until suddenly and out of nowhere, she began to hear her name being called from another room. At first, the voices used the tone of someone in her family, but they quickly changed, and then they were the tone of complete strangers. Later, her illness caused her to see black heads peeking out and quickly hiding behind half-open doors, walls, or any other surface where someone might want to spy and hide. Those visions are the ones she hates the most. She still can't get used to them. The last time the woman had an appointment with him, she said that this time she had tried to cope with her vision by calmly observing it and staying still. Even though its appearance was the most disturbing, she tried to do what she could and did not take her eyes off it. She followed the instructions that the doctor had given her and proceeded to draw the creature. This photo is not a drawing of a memory or representation. It is literally the creature she was seeing at that very moment. A wide-open eye that never stopped looking at her, without blinking and without moving. According to her, it was like that for at least 35 minutes. The doctor continues in his email saying that around the year 2008, he received a better offer to work in a psychiatric hospital where he had to treat dozens of patients. He tells us that he has more than 100 drawings accompanied by quite terrifying stories from several of them. But the reason for his email was because of a specific pattern he detected some time ago. The first to report the vision that was taking over the minds of some patients was a 42-year-old man. He was in a session with him when he noticed that he was extremely alarmed, almost completely decompressed, because he assured that the entire hospital would burn down. The reason? A boy on fire was running towards him to warn him. It took him an hour to draw what you now see on the screen. The doctor knew that he was a meticulous draftsman. Perhaps not as good as the painters he saw at the beginning, but he did have talent. And furthermore, art therapy requires the time that the patient needs to give to the drawing. Art therapy requires the time that the patient needs to give to drawing, which is part of the therapy. At first, and according to what he himself wrote to us in the email, he treated this as just another illusion. There was nothing strange about it. The strange thing was that it began to be repeated with at least 2 other patients. Both photos correspond to drawings of 2 different patients. Both described a mysteriously similar story. A child who burst into their piece covered in flames, as if they had agreed on what story to tell. The doctor tells us that it is normal that sometimes the visions of one patient jump to another because they have to live together in the hospital. And there are some good friends, so it is likely that they have shared their visions. And some are more suggestible than others, and can in some way keep the description of the vision in their subconscious. However, this is rare, since schizophrenia is a complex illness, and the hallucinations and delusions that people experience are highly individual. What do you think is happening here? Is it simply suggestion? Or do you really think there is something that is getting into the patient's minds? Leave your theories in the comment box, because this video has already come to an end. I'm Leonore Clay, and this was The Darkest. secret